Hello, welcome to the Whispered Abyss channel. Happy viewing. The soft hum of the heater filled Ella's tiny apartment, mingling with the sound of her pencil scratching against paper. The desk lamp illuminated her cluttered workspace, casting harsh shadows on the walls. Her reflection in the mirror looked haggard, her dark curls a tangled mess, and her eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. Before her lay a sketchpad, and on it, the latest iteration of the face. Almost, Ella whispered, her voice shaky with frustration. She tilted the page closer to the light, scrutinizing every line, every curve. It was close, closer than she'd ever managed before, but something was missing. The cheekbones didn't have the right lift. The eyes lacked the haunting depth she dreamed of night after night. With a growl, she ripped the page from the pad, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it across the room, where it joined a growing pile of discarded sketches. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Ella leaned back, her chair groaning in protest, and closed her eyes. The perfect face had come to her in a dream 3 weeks ago. She'd woken in a cold sweat, the details burned into her mind with the sharpness of a photograph. It wasn't just a face, it was the face. A face so achingly beautiful it defied explanation. She'd been chasing it ever since, her obsession consuming every waking hour. A sharp buzz broke through her thoughts. Her phone lit up on the desk, displaying a message from her friend and former colleague, Naomi. Naomi, any progress on your portfolio? That makeup artist showcase is next month. Ella grimaced. The showcase was her chance to finally get her career back on track. But without a signature piece, a project that would set her apart from the endless sea of beauty influencers and wannabe artists, she'd be just another face in the crowd. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating before typing back. Ella, working on something big. You'll see. Her thumb hesitated over the send button, but she pressed it anyway. Her stomach churned as the reply came in seconds later. Naomi. Better be amazing. Heard you're already the joke of the showcase. Ella's jaw tightened. Naomi had always been blunt, but this cut deeper than usual. Her gaze drifted back to the mirror, her reflection staring back with tired eyes. Was she a joke? She didn't feel like laughing. The bell above the door jingled as Ella entered the beauty supply store the next afternoon. The air smelled of plastic and perfume, and rows of bright packaging glittered under fluorescent lights. She grabbed a basket and began tossing in items with practiced efficiency. Silicone molds, pigments, and adhesives. She moved like a woman on autopilot, barely noticing the two women whispering near the counter. Is that Ella Parks? One of them murmured, loud enough to carry. The one who botched that bridal shoot last year? Replied the other, her voice dripping with mockery. Ella's grip tightened around the basket handle, her knuckles turning white. She used to be decent. Guess some people peak early, the first one said, giggling. Ella's heart pounded. She forced herself to walk past them, head held high, but their words burned into her mind like acid. Once outside, she stopped and took a deep breath, trying to shake the humiliation clinging to her skin. They'll see, she muttered to herself, gripping her supplies like a lifeline. Her reflection in the shop window stared back at her with fierce determination. Just one more project, one more shot. Ella pasó el resto de la noche en un frenesí de trabajo. Her apartment seemed smaller with every passing hour, the walls closing in as her discarded projects piled up. But tonight, the mask began to take shape. She worked late into the night, her hands moving with precision, layering pigments and molding silicone until something resembling her dream took form. The face that stared back at her was lifelike, almost unnervingly so. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. But when she turned the mask in the light, she saw it, the imperfection. The cheekbones were too sharp, the mouth too thin. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't right. No, Ella whispered, her voice trembling. The hope drained from her body, leaving behind cold emptiness. It's wrong. It's all wrong. With a trembling hand, she grabbed the mask and threw it against the wall. It shattered into pieces, fragments of her dream lying broken on the floor. Ella se desplomó de rodillas, mirando el desastre. Su respiración se detuvo. The heater hummed. The walls felt closer, and in the back of her mind, the face from her dreams smiled at her, taunting her, whispering, "Try again." The sound of Ella's phone buzzing startled her awake. She blinked, disoriented, her cheek pressed against the cold surface of her desk. The fragments of the shattered mask were still scattered across the floor, glowing faintly in the morning light. Groaning, she reached for the phone and squinted at the screen. Unknown number. I've seen your work. I have a proposition for you. Ella frowned, her mind struggling to piece together who might have sent the message. She tapped back, her curiosity outweighing her exhaustion. Ella, who is this? The response came instantly. Unknown number. A patron of the arts. I can offer you everything you've dreamed of, but only if you're willing to create something truly unique. Ella sat up, her heart pounding. Her gaze drifted to the broken mask on the floor, her mind racing. Was this some kind of prank? Before she could respond, another message arrived. Unknown number. Meet me at Café Noir. 8 p.m. tonight. Bring your best work. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the delete button. But something about the tone of the messages, the undeniable confidence, gripped her. She had nothing to lose. Not anymore. That evening, Ella arrived at Café Noir, a small, dimly lit coffee shop tucked into a side street she rarely visited. The air smelled of coffee and cinnamon, and the faint murmur of conversation filled the room. A man sat in the far corner, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. "Ella Parks?" he asked as she approached, his voice low and smooth. "Yes." She hesitated, then sat across from him, clutching her portfolio like a shield. "Who are you?" "You can call me Mr. Ash," he said, removing his hat to reveal sharp, angular features and piercing blue eyes. "I represent certain collectors, people who value art that pushes boundaries." Ella's stomach tightened. "I'm not interested in games. If you're not serious—" "Oh, I'm quite serious." Mr. Ash leaned forward, his gaze locking onto hers. "We've been watching you, Ella. We know about your dream." The face, her breath caught in her throat. How do you know about that?" "We have our ways," he said with a faint smile. "And we believe you have the talent to bring it to life. But perfection comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Ella's hands trembled. She didn't know if it was fear or excitement that gripped her. What kind of price? Mr. Ash slid a sleek black envelope across the table. Inside, you'll find the details of the commission. All the resources you need will be provided. But once you accept, there's no turning back. She stared at the envelope, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. This was insane. And yet, "What's in it for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Recognition," he said simply. "Fame, success, everything you've been chasing, and more." Ella swallowed hard, her gaze flicking between the envelope and Mr. Ash's enigmatic expression. This was the opportunity she'd been waiting for, wasn't it? Slowly, she reached out and took the envelope. Back in her apartment, Ella tore open the envelope, her hands shaking. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words written in elegant cursive. The commission is simple. Create the perfect face, one that no human can look away from, one that haunts their dreams. You have 7 days. Her heart raced as she read the next line. Failure is not an option. Ella's hands dropped to her sides, the letter slipping to the floor. Her reflection in the mirror caught her eye. Her own face stared back, pale and drawn, her lips parted in shock. And behind her, for the briefest moment, she thought she saw something move. A flicker of shadow where there shouldn't have been one. Just my imagination, she whispered, her voice trembling. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. Ella's apartment became a fortress of obsession over the next few days. She locked the door, ignored her phone, and buried herself in her work. The supplies Mr. Ashe had promised arrived promptly. A sleek black box containing premium tools and exotic materials she'd never seen before. Among them were pigments that shimmered like oil slicks, silicone that felt uncannily like human skin, and tiny, gem-like fragments labeled lunar resin. The instructions were clear, almost disturbingly so. Every step was outlined in precise detail, from the mold to the finishing touches. But despite the guidance, Ella couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a creative challenge. The first night, the dreams began again. In the darkness, the face appeared, hovering just out of reach, as if taunting her. It was more vivid than ever, its beauty so sharp it felt like a blade against her mind. The dream always ended the same way. She reached out to touch it, only for it to dissolve into shadow. Ella woke each time drenched in sweat, her pulse racing. She'd sit up, staring at the wall until her breathing slowed, then drag herself back to the project. Sleep became an afterthought. By the third day, the mask was starting to take shape. Ella se inclinó sobre su banco de trabajo, sus manos moviéndose con una mezcla de precisión y frenesí. The cheekbones were perfect, high and sculpted. The lips were full, their curve inviting yet mysterious. She layered the pigments carefully, creating a complexion that seemed to glow from within. But it was the eyes that gave her pause. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't capture their essence. In her dreams, the face's eyes had been the most haunting feature. Piercing, infinite, as though they held the weight of the universe. Yet every attempt to recreate them fell flat. Ella stood back, her hands smeared with pigment and resin. The mask stared back at her from the workbench, incomplete but already unnervingly lifelike. "It's not enough," she muttered, her voice cracking. "It's still not enough." A sharp knock at the door made her jump. She glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. Who the hell? Ella hesitated, her heart pounding as she approached the door. Peering through the peephole, she saw nothing but the dimly lit hallway. She unlocked the door cautiously, opening it a crack. No one was there. Her breath hitched as she noticed something on the floor. A small black box, identical to the one Mr. Ashe had sent earlier. She picked it up, her hands trembling, and carried it to the table. Inside was a single object, a pair of glass eyes, eerily realistic, their irises a swirling blend of colors that seemed to shift in the light. As she held them up, her breath caught. These were the eyes from her dreams. A folded note at the bottom of the box read, "You're closer than you think. Finish it." Ella worked through the night, the mask becoming more than just an art piece. It felt alive under her hands, its features so perfect they seemed otherworldly. She inserted the glass eyes carefully, securing them with adhesive and blending the edges seamlessly. When she stepped back to examine her work, her knees nearly gave out. The mask stared back at her, its beauty so profound it was almost painful to look at. Every detail was flawless, from the curve of the lips to the glint in the eyes. It was perfect. And yet, as she stared, a chill ran down her spine. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw the mask's lips twitch, just the faintest hint of a smile. Ella shook her head, rubbing her eyes. "I'm losing it," she muttered. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. The next morning, Ella placed the finished mask in a sleek black case and sent a message to Mr. Ashe. "Ella, it's done." His reply came seconds later. "Mr. Ashe, I'll arrange the pickup. Be ready." She set the phone down, her chest tight with a mix of relief and unease. The mask sat on the table, its lifelike gaze following her as she moved about the room. And then, as she turned her back, she swore she heard something. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. A breath. By the time Mr. Ashe's driver arrived, Ella was exhausted but restless, her mind spinning with 1,000 unanswered questions. The mask sat in its black case on the table, sealed and ready for delivery. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. At precisely 9 p.m., a sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment. A tall, stoic man in a tailored suit emerged, his movements sharp and deliberate. He knocked once, then waited. "Ella abrió la puerta con cautela." The man gave her a curt nod. "Ms. Parks, I'm here for the piece." She hesitated, her hand gripping the edge of the door. "Do you work for Mr. Ashe?" The man's expression didn't waver. "Mr. Ashe handles clients. I handle logistics." Something about his cold efficiency made Ella uneasy, but she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He moved like a shadow, his eyes scanning the room before settling on the black case. "This is it?" he asked. Ella nodded, her stomach churning. He picked up the case with a surprising gentleness, as if he knew exactly how valuable its contents were. Turning back to her, he reached into his pocket and handed her a white envelope. "Your payment." Ella took it reluctantly, her fingers brushing against the stiff paper. It felt heavier than she'd expected. "Mr. Ashe will be in touch," the man said, already heading for the door. "Wait." He paused, his hand on the doorknob. What happens now?" Ella asked. Her voice sounded small, even to herself. The man turned his head slightly, his eyes cold and unreadable. "Now? You move on to your next masterpiece." And with that, he was gone. The apartment felt oppressively quiet after his departure. Ella sat at her desk, staring at the white envelope in her hands. She tore it open, expecting cash or maybe a check. Instead, she found a single piece of paper with one line written in that same elegant cursive. "Perfection breeds consequence." Her breath caught. Beneath the note was a photograph. It was the mask. But in the picture, it wasn't resting in its case. It was being worn. The person in the photo was seated in a grand, dimly lit room, their posture regal. The mask fit them perfectly, melding with their skin as if it had grown there. But it wasn't the serene, lifeless beauty Ella had crafted. The mask had changed. Its eyes glimmered with something dark and knowing, and the lips were curled into a faint, chilling smile. Ella's stomach turned as she flipped the photo over. On the back, more words were scrawled in cursive. "You've given it life. Are you prepared for what it takes?" That night, Ella's dreams were darker than ever. The face no longer hovered just out of reach. It was everywhere, looming above her, whispering in a language she couldn't understand. Its perfect features were no longer comforting. They were suffocating. She woke with a start, her heart hammering. The shadows in her room seemed deeper, more alive. A sound drew her attention. A faint creak, like someone shifting their weight. She turned toward the table where the mask had once been, and froze. The black case was gone. Ella no durmió para el resto de la noche. She paced the small confines of her apartment, her mind spiraling. The black case was gone, taken by the driver. But the unease remained, growing sharper by the minute. The photograph lay on her desk, its weight far heavier than its paper should allow. The masked figure's knowing gaze seemed to pierce through her, as if it could see her even now. "This is just some elaborate game," she muttered to herself, trying to shake the paranoia. But her voice sounded hollow. She tried calling Mr. Ash, but the line went straight to voicemail. She sent a message, then another, but there was no reply. By morning, the exhaustion was unbearable. She slumped into her chair, staring at the photograph again. The longer she looked, the more details seemed to emerge. Faint veins beneath the mask's surface, the delicate tension in the wearer's hands as they rested on their lap. She flipped the photo over, rereading the words. "You've given it life. Are you prepared for what it takes?" What it takes? What did that mean? Ella decided she couldn't wait for answers to come to her. She grabbed her coat and headed out into the brisk morning air, determined to track down Mr. Ash. The gallery was her first stop, though she hadn't been there in weeks. When she arrived, the familiar glass doors gleamed under the sunlight, but something was wrong. The interior looked different. The usual vibrant displays of modern art were gone, replaced by muted tones and dim lighting. She pushed the door open cautiously, the bell jingling above her. "Hello?" Her voice echoed in the empty space. A single piece of art hung in the center of the gallery, a massive, floor-length mirror framed in black. As Ella approached, she noticed faint carvings etched into the frame. Symbols she didn't recognize. The reflection stared back at her, but there was something wrong. Her features seemed sharper, almost exaggerated, like a distorted version of herself. Her eyes, were unsettlingly similar to the glass eyes she'd placed in the mask. A voice broke the silence. "It's unsettling, isn't it?" Ella spun around to see a man standing in the shadows. It was Mr. Ash, dressed impeccably as always, his expression unreadable. "What is this?" Ella demanded, gesturing toward the mirror. "A reflection," he said simply, "of what you've created." Her stomach churned. "I need answers. That photograph. What does it mean? Who wore the mask? Why—" Mr. Ash raised a hand, silencing her. "Calm yourself, Ms. Parks. All will be explained in time." "No." Her voice rose. "You're going to explain now. I didn't sign up for whatever this is." Mr. Ash smiled faintly, a gesture devoid of warmth. "Didn't you? You sought perfection, did you not? You gave it life." Ella stepped back, her pulse racing. "What are you talking about?" He moved closer, his gaze pinning her in place. The mask was not merely a creation, it was a vessel, and now that it's complete, it seeks to fulfill its purpose. Her mind reeled. Its purpose? What purpose? Mr. Ash's smile widened, and for the first time, Ella noticed something strange about his eyes. They shimmered, just like the glass eyes in the mask. "To find a face," he said softly. "The perfect face." Ella stumbled back, panic setting in. This is insane. You're insane." Mr. Ash's expression remained calm, almost amused. "Insanity is simply a matter of perspective, Miss Parks, but you'll understand soon enough." Before she could respond, the lights flickered, and a cold draft swept through the gallery. When she looked back at the mirror, her reflection was gone. In its place was the mask. Its eyes glimmered, its lips curling into that same faint, unsettling smile. And then it spoke. "Thank you, Ella," it whispered, the voice chillingly familiar, "for giving me life." Ella bolted from the gallery, her breath coming in ragged gasps as her mind raced. The mask had spoken. It was impossible, should have been impossible, but she had heard it. Her legs carried her through the city streets, weaving through the morning crowds. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to get away. By the time she slowed, she was in a part of the city she rarely visited, surrounded by old brick buildings and narrow alleyways. She leaned against a lamp post, trying to catch her breath. "It's not real," she whispered to herself, clutching her arms. "It's not real." But the photograph in her pocket felt all too real, its edges pressing into her palm. She pulled it out, staring at the image again. The mask's eerie smile seemed wider now, as if mocking her. She flipped it over. The words on the back had changed. "It's watching." A chill ran down her spine. Ella spun around, her eyes darting across the empty street. Was someone following her? She couldn't tell. By evening, she was back in her apartment, the door triple locked. She closed all the blinds, leaving only the flickering light of her desk lamp to illuminate the room. She needed answers. Grabbing her laptop, she searched for anything she could find about Mr. Ash, the gallery, or the mask's symbols. The results were sparse. Most of what she found were vague mentions of his name tied to high-profile art sales. Then, she found an article buried in an obscure blog. It mentioned a mysterious figure known for acquiring living art, pieces said to be imbued with some essence of their creators. The blog described one such artist who had disappeared after completing a sculpture for him. Ella's heart pounded. A knock at the door shattered her focus. She froze, the blood draining from her face. It was nearly midnight. No one ever visited her at this hour. The knock came again, louder this time. "Miss Parks?" a voice called out. It was calm, smooth, and utterly unfamiliar. "May I have a word?" Ella no si movio. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the police. But the line crackled and went dead before she could speak. "Miss Parks," the voice called again, more insistent now. "We both know you're in there. I won't ask again." The doorknob rattled. Ella grabbed a kitchen knife, clutching it tightly as she backed away. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then a faint, raspy whisper came from the other side of the door. "You gave it life, Ella. Now it wants yours." Her scream caught in her throat as she heard the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. By the time dawn broke, Ella's exhaustion had reached its peak. She hadn't slept. Her mind felt like a tangled web of fear and confusion. The note's words haunted her. "It's watching." She felt eyes on her constantly, though every time she checked there was nothing there. She couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her coat and headed to the one place she swore she'd never go back to, the gallery. It was empty when she arrived, just as before. But this time, she noticed something new, a faint trail of black ash leading from the center of the room to a back hallway. Summoning what little courage she had, Ella followed the trail. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, the walls narrowing as she walked. At the end was a door. It creaked open on its own, revealing a dark, cavernous room. In the center stood a pedestal, and on it rested the mask. It was different now. The porcelain surface was cracked, its edges pulsing faintly like veins. The eyes glowed dimly, watching her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Ella," it whispered. She stumbled back, but the door slammed shut behind her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't happening." The mask's smile widened. "You cannot run from perfection. You made me. Now I am you." As it spoke, Ella felt a sharp, burning sensation on her face. She screamed, clutching her cheeks as the pain spread. When she looked into the reflective surface of the pedestal, her reflection stared back at her. Except it wasn't her. It was the mask. Ella's scream echoed through the cavernous room, but no one came to her aid. Her reflection in the pedestal's surface mocked her, the mask now fused to her face. The once smooth porcelain was jagged and alive, pulsating as if it had become part of her skin. She clawed at it, desperate to remove it, but the mask wouldn't budge. Each pull sent searing pain through her, as though her very essence was tethered to it. "You're mine now," the mask whispered, though its lips didn't move. Its voice was inside her head, a cruel melody that matched the rhythm of her pounding heart. Ella stumbled back, her vision blurring. The room shifted and warped around her, the walls melting into shadows that crawled toward her. The pedestal crumbled, sending shards of glass-like material scattering across the floor. A door appeared in the distance, faintly glowing. Ella didn't hesitate. She ran toward it, her breaths ragged, the mask's voice laughing in her ears. "You can't escape me. You are me." She reached the door and shoved it open, finding herself back in her apartment. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it. The cluttered desk, the half-empty coffee mug, the photograph lying on the counter. But something was wrong. Her reflection in the window wasn't her own. It was the mask's face, staring back at her with cold, unfeeling eyes. Ella se tambaleó lejos de la ventana, el pánico agarrándole la garganta. She grabbed her phone, but the screen wouldn't turn on. The mask's voice rang out again, louder this time, reverberating through her mind. "There is no going back, Ella. You wanted perfection. Now you have it." "No!" she screamed, slamming her fists into the counter. "This isn't what I wanted." The photograph on the counter caught her eye. She picked it up, her hands trembling. The masked figure in the image was gone. In its place was her own face, her old face before the mask. The back of the photograph bore new words. "Find me where it began." Ella's mind raced. Where it began? The gallery? The studio? No, it had to be before that. She thought back to the day she'd first met Mr. Ashe. The auction. It was raining when Ella arrived at the old auction house. The building loomed over her, its once grand facade now cracked and weathered. She hesitated at the entrance, her breath visible in the cold night air. The doors creaked as she pushed them open, revealing the dimly lit interior. Rows of empty chairs faced a stage covered in a heavy black curtain. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of decay. She stepped forward, her footsteps echoing in the silence. "Ella," the mask's voice purred. "Do you really think you can undo what's been done?" "I don't care what you are," she said aloud, her voice trembling but defiant. "You don't own me." The mask's laughter filled the room. "Oh, but I do." The stage lights flickered to life, illuminating a single figure standing center stage. It was Mr. Ashe, holding the mask in his hands. except it wasn't a mask anymore. It was a face. Her face. "Welcome, Miss Parks," Mr. Ashe said, his tone smooth and commanding. "You've come full circle." "Give it back," she demanded, stepping closer to the stage. "Whatever this is, whatever you've done, it ends now." He tilted his head, amused. "Ends? Oh, my dear, it hasn't even begun." The mask in his hands began to shift, its features contorting into a grotesque version of her own. The eyes opened, glowing with the same eerie light. Ella felt a pull, a magnetic force dragging her toward the stage. She resisted, digging her heels into the floor, but it was no use. "You can't fight it," Mr. Ashe said, stepping aside as the mask floated upward. "Perfection demands a price." The mask lunged toward her, its jagged edges glinting in the light. Ella screamed as it collided with her face, merging with the one already fused to her skin. The pain was unbearable, like fire coursing through her veins. Her body convulsed as the room dissolved around her, replaced by an endless void. When the agony finally subsided, Ella opened her eyes. She was back in the gallery, standing in front of the mirror. But the reflection staring back at her wasn't her own. It was the mask, fully formed, flawless, and alive. Ella reached up to touch her face, but her hands didn't move. She wasn't in control anymore. Inside her mind, she screamed, but the mask's voice silenced her. "Shh," it whispered. "You wanted to be perfect, Ella, and now you are." The mask turned away from the mirror and walked out of the gallery, leaving Ella trapped inside its hollow shell. Forever.